The following show is brought to you in part by support from Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. We don't just practice law, we make history. Online at rkmc.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm talking tonight with Congressman Martin Sabo, who is completing his 14th term as congressman this December, and will be leaving public office at this point. I'm delighted he could be here to be part of our leadership series, and I'm looking forward to plying you with questions, Martin.
Good.
So
Good to be here with you, Mary.
yes, we've talked together on this set
Right.
a few years ago. I'd love to ask you a bit about your early days before
Sure.
we get into talking more about leadership. You just told me both your parents immigrated from Norway.
They were both Norwegian immigrants. My father was a homesteader and farmer up in northwestern North Dakota.
Northwestern,
Yeah,
okay.
about 10 miles from Montana and 10 from Canada.
Is
Very
it
rural.
Lisbon?
No, that's way in the east part.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 10 miles from Montana, 10 from Canada, way up in the
Okay,
corner.
way up in the corner.
Small
Yes.
town. I had a high school graduating class of 3.
Oh, wow.
So-
So some one-room schoolhouses, I bet.
Actually, my 8th grade class was 2. And then my freshman class grew to 4 because 2 girls came in from different one-room grade schools. And then one of them transferred after her sophomore year, so there were only 3 of us my senior year.
Wow, that's something we just don't hear about anymore. Then you went on to Augsburg.
Right, I came here.
What kind of got you to Augsburg?
Well, it was a connection through the old Lutheran Free Church, and my sister had gone there 1 year, and there were several other people from my hometown going there, and so it was sort of just a natural place to go.
Family kind of a tradition almost. You ran for the Minnesota House when you were 22.
Right.
And I was asking him, how did you have the nerve to do that at 22, coming from northwestern North Dakota? And you said...
I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
You know, a variety of people encouraged me to run. I did, and I just went out and knocked lots of doors, saw lots of people, and asked them to vote for me, and in the end, they did.
And you were in the Minnesota House for 18 years?
18 years, yeah.
And Speaker of the House for 6 of those,
6 years, and Minority Leader for 4.
When you think back to those 18 years, what is the legislation that you're proudest of, or the accomplishment?
Actually, what I'm most proud of happened before we became the majority. And I would not trade those years in the legislature for anything. And being Speaker of the House, that's tough to top. And I thoroughly enjoyed that, a very challenging job. But the most memorable things from legislative days occurred in 1971. Wendy Anderson had been elected governor. The Republicans still controlled the legislature by a small margin. Wendy made a major proposal for reforming school financing and local government aid and property taxes in Minnesota. And that became the focal point of that session. We had several vetoes. We had long special sessions.
A lot of late nights.
Lots of late nights. In the end, lots of negotiations across party lines at the governor's mansion to arrive at a final package. I think it passed the end of October finally.
Wow.
And it had bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition, but it passed substantially, and the governor signed it, and really has served as a framework for finance of the financial relationship between state and local government and local school districts for many, many years in this state.
And didn't it become a model
Yeah.
really for many, many other states who looked at us and said, let's try that?
They tried, many of them tried and failed, but it was called the Minnesota Miracle.
Right, right.
And it was Wendy Anderson as governor who provided the real leadership, and then lots of legislators across party lines who worked very hard to negotiate that final package.
When you look from here and look back on that period, what do you think, Martin, about your role as a leader during that time made the biggest difference? You know,
well, that's
people,
always hard to tell. You know, leadership is hard to define. It's it is rarely about telling people what to do. It's more listening to people.
I've had many of my leaders say that.
Yeah, it's
that
listening. I have always thought that, for instance, as Speaker, that's considered the second most powerful job in the state to the governor. I always describe it as two ways. Individually, you have less freedom than anyone else, but you also have more opportunity to guide the totality of what happens than anyone else. So in many times, leadership involves being given more of yourself and then having greater impact on what happens.
I remember James Shannon talked in some similar terms, saying that he found it almost amazing that people would follow him the way they did, but he was setting, I think, as you did, an example that
well, you have to listen,
energized.
and then you hope you challenge people. The real challenge is trying to make an institution as good or better than the individual parts.
Now that's a statement. Say that again, because we need to hear that again.
Challenge of leadership in a place like the legislatures. Try and make the institution as good or better than the individual parts. Too often, I think legislative bodies are significantly worse than the individual parts. Individual members are significantly better than the collective product.
I bet you would say you learned that in spades as a congressman.
Well, probably more in the legislature than.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I never assumed that when I was running for Congress I was a step up. At best, it was a lateral move and maybe backwards. Because so much of what impacts people's lives day to day is really governed by the relationship between state and local government. And the federal government has major, I suppose, impact on foreign policy, on some major thrusts of the economy nationally. But I've described myself as a liberal decentralist. I tend to be a skeptic of the capacity of central government, particularly to define and write social programs that fit everyone around the country. I think you need flexibility at the state level.
As you contemplate retiring now, Martin, what is your proudest moment or the thing you feel best about in terms of your role as a congressman?
Well,
as I mentioned, 14 terms, 28 years.
There I had, in '93, when Clinton was elected president, Leon Panetta, who chaired the Budget Committee, was appointed Director of Office of Management and Budget. And I ran for Budget Chair, which was an election. So you had to be elected by your colleagues. It was not seniority. And I won that election over a very talented person who's a very good friend of mine, who's served as ranking Democrat since.
Now, who is that?
John Spratt of South Carolina, who I have highest regard for. And but I won that election, was chair of the Budget Committee, where we put the budget framework together in '93, reflecting Clinton's program. And again, that was a significant deficit reduction. Worked better than we expected. The economy responded very positively to it, and well, I have to say that it really started in 1990 when Bush 1 was president. We had a bipartisan budget agreement. Then we had the '93 agreement, and those really were the basis for getting our fiscal house together in the 1990s.
But when President Bush, our current president, turned that around or let it go.
Drastic mistake.
You must have been, how did you feel? You must have been sick.
Yeah, I always thought that, I described in 2000 that I thought the biggest issue was whether it would be our capacity to manage a projected surplus. and we've blown it immensely. And I think with reckless fiscal policy, and it's going to be a tough time digging out of. We have the baby boomers coming soon into retirement, and we've done some real holes for ourselves, and we keep digging them deeper, and it didn't have to be that way. You know, there are variations because of 9/11, the economy goes up and down, all of those have impact, but the hole we've dug goes way beyond the impact of 9/11 or the ups and downs of the economy.
How long do you think it will take before we get out of this hole?
I don't know.
Given the best of circumstances.
I don't know. I think it's going to be more difficult than it was in the 90s. And I guess my advice to people would be to quit digging it the hole deeper and stabilize and then start working at reducing them.
A lot of people that I talk to have been very disappointed in our legislative branch of the government in terms of challenging and pushing the executive branch. And, you know, that's a real generalization, of course, but how do you feel about the balance, check and balance situation that we have now, which seems to be weaker than it has been?
I think that's right. I think my sense has been the current Republicans have been very docile in relationship to the executive branch. And I think the Bush administration
docile in going along with
docile
the president.
In terms of oversight and questioning. And the Bush administration is, I think, very arrogant towards Congress, and they also have a very aggressive view of the power of the presidency. And they push that very hard. And there's some oversight that goes on, but not nearly the type and extent that it should have been over the most recent years.
As a leading Democrat, though, do you feel like the Democrats have done what they could do?
Yeah, and oversight is not simple.
No, I'm sure.
It's not giving speeches with the most inflammatory rhetoric. It is not necessarily having hearings. If you want to do good oversight, that involves lots of serious, tough staff work. It involves the capacity to have subpoena power, things which you don't have in the minority, and you don't have that much. So often when the minority is involved, it gets to be a little more simplified than I like. And because a good oversight requires somebody who really knows what they're doing and lots of hard work, not simply some press releases.
Do you feel that in the next election that's coming along in November, we're going to have a shifting that will make a difference?
I think so, but you know, that's still 2.5, 3 months away.
Lots of things can get in the way, can't they,
4 months,
happen?
and you never know what happens at the end. I think if the election were in this current period of time, I think Democrats would do quite well in both House and Senate races.
Right now, today, July 31st, 2006.
Hottest day of the summer when we're taping this. And on the other hand, I've always observed in the elections there's certain momentum that happens for one party or the other at the end. I've never been able to figure out what governs it. It happens.
The variables.
Yeah, and in many ways beyond the control of individual candidates.
Yes. Is your personal frustration level fairly high with the way things have been going in terms of the check and balance system?
Well, some of that, and but the whole political process is more and more politics and less substance.
That's a strong statement, Martin. More and more politics, less and less substance.
And
explain that a bit further.
Well, I think more and more political posturing, and I think that crosses party lines. It sort of escalates, and I think that tends to be the nature of politics today. Lots of it fed by the quick sound bites of television.
Well, I was just going to say, what's the role of the media here in letting this?
That's what they like.
Go.
They like the the media covers very little of substance anymore, and they like to cover the, as somebody would say, the game of it, and the score, and who's winning and losing, rather than the substance of it. And I think that's been going on for a period of time.
Do you commiserate with some of the more moderate and liberal Republicans in terms of what's going on, what needs to be done? Is there much sharing behind the scenes?
Not that much.
There is not.
I don't think there are that many moderate Republicans anymore.
Okay, so
although there are lots of good Republicans who I think with different types of leadership, you know, take seriously what they're doing. So I don't want to overstate that, because the bulk of the members take their job very seriously.
do you feel that when you first became a congressman, there was more dialogue, more congeniality?
I think so, and that's disappeared for a variety of reasons. And part of it's the public's more polarized. And
so you're reflecting as a body that fact.
I think the polarization that exists in the public is significantly higher than it was 25, 30 years ago. The anger they have against it, you know, the dislike of the conservatives of Clinton and the dislike of liberals of Bush is
very strong emotions, aren't there, on both sides?
And some of it justified, and other times not. And that makes it tougher in the political process, I think.
In some ways, does the polarization make you think, part of me is glad to be getting out at this point?
Yeah, I've been there, 28 years in Congress, 46 years in public office. I've enjoyed it. I'd do it all over again.
Would you?
Time to move on.
Any regrets when you think of your own career? I read a quote, Martin, that said that you felt that if you kept your mouth shut, you wouldn't get in trouble.
No, I don't know if that's accurate. But
is that a misquote?
Yeah, not really. Although I think people really get in trouble for what they don't say. And but
are there regrets that you feel about a stance you took on an issue?
No, not really.
No.
No, you can't. You deal with all kinds of issues and you move on to the next. I do have a fairly strong view of, the fact is, I think in a leadership, in a legislative body, somewhat different than the executive. The executive is a spokesman in many ways with the public. A legislative body, very few of the things I've ever accomplished have been related to giving a speech. You either get it
more
done.
The behind the scenes, heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's lots of work, non-glamorous, that you get done. Speech making is normally what you do when you're losing.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, it's just. But most of the time, if you're getting something done, it's not.
It's not so glamorous, and it's not so
it's
so
not
reportable, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's not because of speeches.
What's the part that we understand the least about your work? Would it be that nitty-gritty work?
Yeah, I think, and that's what the job is, lots of nitty-gritty work, trying to solve problems that exist.
Getting research
both for people
absorbed. I mean, you've got lots of people doing the research for you, but then you've got to...
relationships with people. It's all part of the process. It's not some grandiose speech that people give. That's normally, I think, in the House, that I'd swear at times that 10% of the people give 90% of the speeches.
Do they?
Yeah.
If we looked at the record, I bet you're right. Of course. One of the things that we haven't touched on, and that I think, when I think of Martin Sabo, I think of transportation bills and gifts, in a sense, that came to Minnesota because of your hard work, the light rail transit. You must feel just wow about that, don't you?
Well, that was a great project to be involved with. And it's worked better than any of us hoped. And
way better. I mean, the projections are just
and the reality is way,
weren't they?
Yeah. But there are lots of, that ended up being high profile. But over the years, we spent lots of time working on funding bus system. which is still important. We spend lots of time on things to make the highway system move better. We have, you know, an intelligent traffic design system here, Minnesota GuideStar we call it, which is all high-tech computerized to observe traffic, make it flow better.
Which we certainly need in this congested time.
And, you know, a variety of involvements with bike trails, you know, so there's just a whole host of things. And some bridges.
I hear you take the light rail transit to the Twins games.
No, I do regularly, yes. Good way to get there.
Yes, so. Great way to get there. You know, a lot of people, I think, look at representatives and senators who get good things going for their state and say, well, but that's, you know, that's being self-oriented in terms of one state and maybe not always so good for the whole. How do you view that question and that issue?
Well, all of us have a responsibility, I think, to have an eye on the totality of it, but we also have a responsibility to aggressively pursue programs that have impact on our state and local communities. If anything, I find that in Minnesota, I think, unfortunately, we come out on the short end of all kinds of distribution formulas for a variety of reasons. If there's anything that I wish I could have a handle on over the years, would be to better understand why that is. But the only program where we do exceptionally well is in fuel assistance.
In terms of the national ratings?
Yeah, because we're cold.
Oh, okay, so we get more federal money for that fuel assistance
than most anything. Then farm programs we do quite well because we're agriculture. Most other things
But we have done well with transportation.
Yeah,
thanks
reasonably
to you.
well. Yeah, and Jim Oberstar, who is ranking Democrat on the authorizing committee, and so you know. You need, everybody else is looking out for their own home state and communities. So you better be doing the same thing.
If you could wave a magic wand and have the power to make some change for our country, a very iffy question, but what would you love to do? What would you love to see happen? What would be your #1 dream?
Well, I think to change the polarization of income between top and bottom.
And that's what you and I talked about a few years ago. When you were here.
Yeah, I think the growing polarization of income in this country and is a major issue. And I think that spills over and has impact on all kinds of other issues. And
how many times did you take that bill? Have you taken it?
Oh, quite a bit.
To the to the group.
But you know, I just think that is a very fundamental issue that we have to deal with.
I can't remember the exact proposal you had, but didn't you say no executive should get more than 25 times
the lowest paid
salary of the
Actually,
lowest? Is that right?
we limited it in the tax code, so they still could get more. But it was fundamentally a message saying that there's a relationship between top and bottom. And I just think, you know, there are other things. Clearly, we should have a significant increase in minimum wage and a variety of other things that need to be done. But I think that is a real ongoing problem.
Your magic wand wish. We just have a couple minutes left. The war in Iraq, what's your stand on it today in July of 2006?
Well, it was a drastic mistake, a real mistake to start. It's very complicated how we get out. You know, we can't undo it. You know, lots of people think we could undo the war, and that's not the case. And so there is lots of chaos there. I think we have to put the real pressure on the Iraqis to take over their government. And that means some real serious negotiation, in particular between the Shiites and the Sunnis, to come out with a workable government. And I think the sooner we put that pressure on them, that responsibility at this point rests with them. On the other hand, we can't say that we're immune from responsibility of starting the conflict.
It's a real mess.
It's a real mess, and I think, frankly, unfortunately, the real impact of the war in Iraq has been significantly increase the power and influence of Iran in the Middle East. And the reality was Iraq was not a threat to us or anyone else. They were isolated. They were not related to and involved with Al-Qaeda and 9/11. On the other hand, the Iranians do have their fingers in lots of troublesome activity.
We know they do.
And the impact of the Iraq war has just been to significantly increase Iranian influence in the Middle East, and I don't think that's a plus for us, the Middle East, or for the world.
Just a quick yes or no, do you think we're safer or less safe than we were 4 years ago, 6 years ago?
I think the reality is that the likelihood that somebody could hijack a plane and fly it into a World Trade Center is significantly less than it was in 9/11. But there are other threats that are there and maybe increase. So it's a mixture, I think, depending on what you may or may not think the threats are.
You were successful in getting the bill through that has to do with privacy, and we don't have time to talk about that, but maybe I can have you back sometime and we'll go into that. That's a very important thing. Just a quick description of how you envision retirement or refirement, as Jim Gamboni says.
I don't know. You know, it's going to happen. I think January 2nd is my last day. We plan on selling our house in Northern Virginia. We have a condo in downtown Minneapolis, so tend to be here full time and see what develops. 6 grandchildren, a couple of daughters, and their husbands and families and sisters.
So you'll have more time for
lots
family,
of relatives,
more time with Sylvia.
And see a few more baseball games and
I
see
bet
friends
you'll get
and
into
reconnect.
some real projects when you get back.
We'll see what happens.
I hope.
We'll see what develops.
Well, thank you so much for coming down. And I kind of pushed through a lot of big questions, but I appreciate your sensibility on all of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We will be back again next week. Have a good week.